waiting for.
Chairman, we're now live streaming again.
Thank you very much. So item 11 is the fly tipping update. I think James is leading on that. James, can I let you take it away?
Thank you. I wasn't sure whether Councillor Banbridge wanted to mention anything at this time or whether you'd rather save it for later. It's up to you.
Well, if I'm allowed, Chairman, I would just say this is a political decision which the council made some years ago before my position in this, and I'm just so pleased with the way we're going. James is going to tell you what we're actually doing and how we're doing it and how we're going about it, but it is something that we, the council, are behind. We have been for some years, and it's something we're progressing, and it's now, I feel, all coming to a sort of fruition. It's something where we're starting to make inroads in the littering in this district. And it's not just in the towns, it's right across the whole of the county. I remember being quite pleased a few months ago when he picked up someone for dropping a McDonald's pack in a back lane in one of the smallest villages in my ward. And I thought, now we're making an impact. You know, this isn't in the big areas, the 1 or 2 streets in the district where the problem is really bad. This is right in the heart of Breckland. So thank you for that, James. And I look forward with interest to hearing your report this morning.
Lovely, thank you, everyone. First of all, just to say thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. For you, those of you that don't know me, my name is James Harding. I was appointed to the role of enforcement officer back in April 2019. You can see on the main screen some locations some of you may recognise. These are just a handful of incidents that I've dealt with over the last give or take 2 years. It's been a process, and as Councillor Banbridge mentioned, I'm content with the direction we're going. There's work to do, but I'd like to just go over some of the things we have been doing. Slide 2, please, Ruth. I appreciate that a PowerPoint presentation may be a bit unorthodox for my first solo overview and scrutiny. I've not been able to address you all directly before during my tenure, so it was appropriate to do so, in my opinion. There's technically 2 presentations. I wanted to utilise something that our comms team and I worked on separately with regards to re-education. There will be a Q&A point at the end. Obviously, if I'm unable to answer your questions at this time, then I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. Slide 3. When I first started in spring 19, my primary objectives were to impact on the rising trajectory of fly tipping and investigate waste offences, taking enforcement action where possible. I was given the distinct impression that Breckland was failing with response to waste offences, and we were lagging behind the other districts. Rob probably won't remember, but meeting Rob on my first day, he sarcastically said to me, please just get one, get us off the mark and I'll be happy. I'm pleased to say we've got more than one, and I'll go through that shortly. I learned very quickly that Breckland's reputation in relation to fly tipping in particular was extremely poor within our communities. I also identified a culture of fly tipping in certain areas based on years of non-engagement and in factually zero enforcement. There was no budget in place, no operational processes or policies in place for me to really conduct my role effectively from the off. So it was very important to start from scratch. Try and use my skill set, implement procedures and actions that were legal, proactive, achievable, and community focused. There are many duties and actions that I do undertake within my role. However, those listed on the screen are my primary that take up the majority of my time. Those of you that have met me know that I pursue every line of inquiry and strive for a positive outcome where possible. One misconception in the past has suggested that Breckland do not investigate fly tippings on private land. I do. I investigate waste offences on private land, providing there is evidence available. Breckland hadn't done this in the past, and although it adds significantly to my workload, I feel it's highly important to do so to ensure that our communities and landowners feel supported. Fly tipping essentially is a crime, and it should be treated as such, regardless of where it takes place. And it's what our public would expect. Slide 4, please. This shows the breakdown of recorded fly tippings over an 8-year period. These figures were published by the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, and is based on figures that are shared by each relevant district. I'm pleased to confirm that our recent figures show a modest reduction on earlier years. This is up to 2019-2020. These are the most recently publicised figures. I'm going to explain how I believe we made this happen. However, I want to bring your attention to these stats in a bit more detail. It's my opinion professionally that our most recent statistics for Breckland are perhaps the most accurate in comparison to any previous years. Breckland is a gateway for the whole of the county as far as access points. And with 5 market towns and huge rural zones in comparison to other districts, any reduction in fly tipping is a great achievement, but our figures for reduction in the last year are particularly deceiving. I'd like to just give you a quick case study. Lovell Gardens in Watton. During my early patrols in spring and summer 19, I used to attend once or twice a week. It was clear that fly tipping was a cultural problem at this site. You could walk through and find 10, 20 fly tips a day. Many caring residents had stopped reporting. There was unrest on social media. Serco staff had long since given up documenting each incident and would simply be there to clear the site as quickly as possible, clear the greens, clear the paths, and then hours later, more waste would be back out. When the fly tipping logs came through to from Serco, only about 5 or 10% of the fly tips found on Lovell Gardens were documented. This was typical at other sites, and if this was the standard practice prior to my tenure, then this could imply that previous years were significantly under-recorded, most likely in the hundreds. My recent work with Serco, frontline staff and management, have included joint walkabouts, training documents, one-to-one sessions, re-education and retraining on evidence gathering. And it's meant that Serco have been recording more accurately since autumn 19. In addition, we have also seen a 500% increase in evidence recording by Serco staff in the last year. 2020 to 21 fly tip statistics will be made public this coming spring and will show higher statistics for fly tipping. The pandemic and lockdowns have seen increases in this sort of behaviour, which has been echoed across the country. That said, the work we have been doing has kept these numbers manageable with only a small rise in total. Slide 5, please. Fixed penalties were introduced to counterweight the necessity to attend court. They can be issued on the spot and combined with other known as FPNs pending the relevant offences. These are the typical FPN values for the primary offences that I deal with. Previously, we've offered a 25% reduction on early payments within 14 days. In 2020, I conducted a review on government fixed penalty values. Breckland's values were low and outdated. As of April this year, we are now issuing slightly higher penalties, which are seen in the red, with a reduction of 20% for early payments provided within 28 days. We also offer a payment plan for those on reduced income. The majority of people pay within the early payment scale, and I'm personally responsible for corresponding with offenders and pursuing and managing the payments. Over the last 2 years, I have not seen a repeat offender come to light. Other districts are continuing at a lower fixed penalty values until they conduct their own reviews. And some have reached out to me for guidance on this, both regards to their own value reviews, but also in the way that we investigate and the way we take enforcement action. You will note that the values for prosecution at court on the right-hand side, costs for local authorities to take cases to court can vary from roughly £1,000 to £3,000 per case. Typically, it's taken about 9 to 18 months to proceed to court. There are certain factors required when considering prosecution at court, which include evidence available, reliable witnesses, a willingness to attend court and provide statements, the impact on the environment and community, the cost of Breckland, of course, mitigation of the suspect, whether their financial means are appropriate to go to court, whether they have household dependencies, whether they've shown remorse and cooperation. These are all factors that the courts would consider. In addition, the attitudes of the courts are a big important factor. Recently, I corresponded with other Norfolk District Councils in relation to their own achievements at court with regards to fly tipping. Over the last 3 years, the courts have issued average sanctions of less than £300 for fly tipping, plus only a tiny fraction of the hefty court fees back. This trend is typical nationally. As our FPNs are seemingly greater than the average court sanction at the moment, you can see why they are effective. Next slide, please. So these figures were made public by DEFRA. It's based on figures that are shared by the relevant districts. I regularly engage with other districts and I'm involved with the Norfolk Waste Enforcement Group, and I can confirm that the statistics that you see are accurate or mostly accurate with regards to the other districts. You can see it shows us pretty much flatlining up until my first year in tenure. 32 fixed penalties issued between 2019 and 2020. So we've effectively gone from the bottom of the pack to the very top, all within a year. Slide 7, please. And obviously, if you hadn't worked it out, that's us in the green. Slide 8. You can see that although there were what I just declare as upper tier fixed penalties, the higher value penalties, which were recorded and recognised by the DEFRA stats, we actually had 40 if you include littering penalties. Of the combined 40, all but 2 fixed penalties were paid. As you can see by my breakdowns, approximately 2/3 of cases led to enforcement action of some capacity. The third or so that didn't were typically based on various mitigations, such as an anonymous reporter with insufficient evidence, duplicated reports whereby someone has or multiple people have reported the same fly tip, incorrectly identified suspects or vehicles, or simply the suspect has vanished or is untraceable. You might not see it at the bottom, but our total income for fixed penalties was give or take about £8,500 in year 1. Next slide, please. The dreaded C word. This had a big impact on my role and the ability to perform it as effectively as I had been. Personal circumstances, as many others, made it hard. My wife was a key worker. We also had our 3-year-old son at the time at home with us. So it made it hard to manage the time, of course. Lockdowns meant that I could not go out and collect the evidence. I couldn't go and take images. I couldn't patrol the hotspots. And I couldn't attend the new emerging sites. More people at home meant more witnesses to incidents, so therefore more reports being made, which is great. But also with more people at home meant more waste. People clearing out their garages, sheds, lofts, replacing their furniture, designing their gardens, as most of us did during the sunny lockdown of number 1. We did see huge surges in cases of fly tipping, particularly during the lockdown periods. I had to rely on identifiable witnesses that came forward. I had to rely on the public heavily to take photos for me and to safely observe any evidence, which thankfully most were willing to do. Our partners, like the Forestry Commission and housing associations, were initially under lockdown, of course, And upon their return, they identified dozens and dozens of fly tips each. I wasn't able to interview. I couldn't legitimately engage with suspects on an evidential basis. I could only sort of issue a caution over the phone and hope that what they say on the phone to me is what they'll stick with later down the line. Access to services and resources were limited. I had to rely on the amazing facility staff to do my printing. Contact centre staff to engage with a lot of my offenders and witnesses, taking payments for me. My brilliant colleagues in environmental services who have tried to support me wherever they could. Tailbacks from other organisations such as the police, the DVLA, Angular Revenues meant that I would be waiting weeks just for one name or one address or one vehicle owner. Additional work beyond my capacity meant that I was not in a position to deal with all the reports that came to me. Between April and June 2020, I had approximately 150 live cases that were of potential to leading to an offender. A normal steady month is about 15 to 20 new cases. So you can see the big change. Upon consultation with senior staff, it was agreed that approximately 50% of cases in this time frame were rejected to focus on the most viable investigations because it was not possible for one person to take on as much as that. Slide 10, please. Further demand as presented on my services during and since COVID. Some items of work coming to me as there was no other department to take it on. Next slide, please. Despite everything, despite COVID, despite the restrictions, I'm pleased to confirm that we did see a modest increase of penalties in last calendar year. It was important to uphold precedents and expectation as much as physically possible. Some other districts stopped investigating altogether to focus on other services. Many individuals within the community were under immense pressure, circumstantially, financially, and mentally. So firm enforcement action was not always necessarily the most appropriate method to deal with offenders. Re-education advice often being the most suitable outcome. And as you can see, an increase in income, just over £10,500. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to almost jump to the next presentation. This presentation was put together by myself and Comms jointly because it was felt that re-education needed more than one or two slides. I won't need to really say much on the next presentation, but it was important to demonstrate the things that we have been trying to do, both in the community and from our laptops at home. Lovely. Investigations and fines are very relevant to demonstrate our stance on fly tipping and waste offences, but re-education is hugely significant within our diverse alternating communities. My efforts prior to COVID to re-educate had included face-to-face dialogue on patrols and also updates to our comms teams via social media. Most of the public had never really had direct engagement about issues within their community. Many were unaware that what they were actually doing was wrong. About 80% of waste offences that come to me are committed by males from within a family residence. Approximately 3/4 of those are English speaking, and a huge majority, about 80–90% of the discarded waste are items that could come, or that have come from a home environment, which could have either been placed in the bins, recycled, or taken to the recycling centre for disposal. Domestic fly tips are often committed close to the home of the offender, so it was important for me to ensure I did whatever I could to engage directly at community level wherever I had the chance. Quick example, the Abbey Estate in Thetford. Breckland had not issued a penalty or taken significant enforcement action against the resident for many years, and you could tell. Many residents that I engaged with door to door said that they were not aware that what they were doing was fly tipping. They believed that they were allowed to discard their waste out the back on the greens and on the paths because the friendly Serco man would come and collect them. During the summer of 19, at the peak cases on the Abbey Estate, Serco were collecting between 1.2 and 1.5 tonnes of waste per week. It was not always deemed malicious fly tipping, whereby people would discard things in the woods or similar behaviours. Most of the time, it was simply stacked up against people's back fences. Following regular engagement with the residents, Flagship Housing as the main housing provider, towards the end of 19 and start of 2020, door to door and through community letters, which I had translated into the main key languages, with a few fixed penalties thrown in, we did see an overall fly tip deduction of about 70% between September 2020 and January 21. Lockdowns presented an unusual opportunity to address re-education behind the scenes while people remained at home. Next slide, please. It also meant that when I had the capacity, I was able to try and identify the hotspots that were, and particularly the new sites that were coming through during lockdowns. We designed posters to simplify the message, to make sure that people knew what they were doing was wrong and give them the bottom line. And as you can see, these were a couple of translated examples. These were placed on bins at bus sites, private businesses who were willing and wanted to get involved. Unfortunately, as it's just me, I'm the only one that's got the time or capacity to go and put them out. And I don't always have that time or capacity. So I hope to get out there a bit more with these posters, but there's roughly about 100 to 120 that are currently out in our communities at the moment. Next slide, please. And again. Again, I'm not going to talk too much, but Comms and I agreed that the move forward to really make a difference would be to get the message out there as much as possible. Word of mouth travels fast, and it is the best means for spreading the word. Most of our media press releases are distributed via the website and via social media pages, and they get picked up by the local press and even national press, as some of these examples show. Next slide, please. Social media has been a big push. It really does enhance the opinions of the public at the moment, particularly with regards to fly tipping and other waste offences. Next slide, please. The general feedback in the early days was very 50-50. It was very much along the lines of, why aren't Breckland doing more? Now we're seeing that, you know, the feedback we're getting now is very much Breckland are doing something about it. Next slide, please. These points were made from comms, and I found it useful to see myself. In a nutshell, they send out messages and information every few weeks, including some case studies of investigations that I've undertaken. Not that I have a look often, but there's often hundreds and hundreds of methods of engagement and comments from members of the public. Next slide, please. And just that last point, that social media posts engage other factors that members of the public want to discuss, and it is always a good talking point, and one that really gets people involved, but also gets them to understand our expectations, but also limitations to a degree as well. I think that's the end of the re-education slide. So just go back to the original. Yeah, so just back to the first slide, the first presentation. Just that one more, if you would, please, Ruth. Love it. With regards to re-education, there's a lot more still to do. A significant proportion of our residents do not follow us on Facebook. They don't read the local press. They may not be of English speaking or reading. Therefore, I'm in the process of identifying community sites where particular diverse groups attend and socialise. Shops, bars, restaurants, hopefully going forward. I want to maximise these sites, to find new ones and to engage with the hard to reach groups, get the messages across as much as possible. But it can't be taken for granted the impact that our social media and press release posts have had, particularly with regards to information. Next slide, please. Quick look on to the year so far. Those of you that are aware, I was on a particular period of absence throughout May and most of June. That said, the work that I've conducted over the last quarter has gained an income of this particular quarter has been better than the previous 6 months of the last 2 years. So we're doing well so far. Next slide, please. It's always a tough one to say what's going to happen next year. I don't think we all really know. But my proposals are as follows. We're doing okay. We can do more. Due to my overloaded capacity and demand, our hotspots are resurging again. I need to find the time to get back out there and do what I did to start with. But one person alone is not enough at the moment to make a huge change in Breckland. Other districts have between 3 and 5 staff doing the same work alongside other antisocial behaviours. And I hope to see 1 or 2 new faces with me in the future. Hope to increase mobile camera use and CCTV, working with other districts and legal team to identify means to increase the mobile cameras around our hotspots. It's not a simple case of just hoisting up a wildlife camera in a tree and waiting for the offender to come along. There are various GDPR factors to consider, as well as manual commitments. I have sourced advice from London boroughs who have got alternative means, so just please bear with me and watch this space. After the summer, I hope to work with various teams to create an all singing, all dancing leaflet, which will include the do's and don'ts for bins, advice on reporting fly tipping, the sanctions, and how to arrange disposal of large items. These will include translations. Social media profile search. So someone puts up a sofa for sale on Facebook. There's no buyers. It ends up fly tipped. At the moment, we don't have a legal policy in place to use Facebook or other social medias to investigate potential offenders, nor do we have the manpower to carry out the research. Upon any expansion of my team, I hope to work with legal teams and comms to view these accounts and use them against the offenders. This could also benefit other departments such as housing and public protection. Schools. Can we prevent fly tipping in 10 years' time, right now? The children of today are very aware of climate change, environment, recycling. Can we get them now to implement a better understanding and reduce the impact of fly tipping, say in 2031? Can they influence their parents? I'm already linking in with a children's group at the Charles Burrell Centre in Thetford at a later date. I'm going to try and do just that, and hopefully others will follow suit. Trade waste. Someone posts into a local community social media group saying that they're looking for a man with a van to take away an old sofa. A trader answers. Is he licensed? Has he used a waste transfer note? Which traders are trustworthy? Where can we find a list for these licensed companies? This is the sort of thing that I'd like to address going forward. I hope to utilise comms with this. Recycling centre checks. Various tradesmen who attend recycling centres that may not be licensed. I have the authority to go in and address that. It's something that I'd like to do going forward. But again, currently capacity is pending. Farming community. Many members of the farming community that I've spoken with have stated that have felt let down by Breckland in the past. As landowners, they're constant victims of waste offences, and the cost to clear is theirs to bear. Previously, we've not been able to offer guidance or prevention advice, and any potential investigation work has been dismissed. And I've tried to change that. I want to do more to reach out to the farming community. There's so much more potential for unreported fly tipping where evidence could be obtained. I hope to conduct some work with the community safety team from Norfolk Constabulary to do this. Finally, the last point, which a few of you may have raised eyebrows. Someone finds a McDonald's bag with some wrappers and a receipt. They are everywhere. There is something that we can do with that, but there are hundreds every day. It takes sometimes a week to address just one of these incidents. I hope to make preliminary arrangements with relevant McDonald's franchises in the coming months to streamline this process, to acquire the information faster in hours rather than weeks, to make it less appealing for customers to leave their waste behind. McDonald's franchises and restaurants do more for the community than what society actually gives it credit for, but maybe they can go a little further alongside us, so please watch this space. Just to conclude for me, I believe that due to a combination of my processes, the methods that we're using for public engagement and information sharing, and through a balanced view of enforcement and re-education, we have seen a huge increase of public faith again, which has been demonstrated in the feedback we receive, plus the huge rise in reports over the last 18 months. I feel this clearly shows that people now recognise that Breckland do take action and that we do take waste offences seriously. There's still a lot of work to do, but the impact of our successes should not be underestimated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, for that extremely thorough presentation. I will go to I'm going to go to my members first, Gordon, and then you can speak. So we'll go Mike, then Peter, then Terry, then Linda. Go ahead, Mike.
In the catalogue of offences, you put duty of care. What does that actually mean?
Duty of care is a piece of legislation that holds waste owners responsible. So just to give an example, there's been incidents where I've identified a piece of evidence that's linked back to a particular person or an address. And they've said to me, yeah, I paid a man with a van to do it. And I'll say, okay, who was the man with the van? And they say, I don't know, I lost his number. That person should not be allowed to disregard their responsibility. They should be seeking a licensed waste carrier, not just someone who will do the job for cheap, cheerful service. So this piece of legislation came in around 2018, 2019 to hold waste owners responsible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, James has worked incredibly hard on his own with this last 12 months, or as I know of, because coming out of COVID last year after the first lockdown, I don't know if it was in lockdown or coming out of it, I had a case in my ward which was serious. It'd been ongoing for a long time, and I thought there's got to be a stand made here. So we corresponded with James and photographs going back and forth as we helped, and it turned out to be a delicate situation because there was other agencies involved with this individual, from the police to mental health and housing association, and James handled it very well, and we did get a positive outcome from that person. They've stopped fly tipping and they had to pay the consequences through a fine. I was just going to say, I definitely support all these pending going forward in 2022, though ideal. Where we've got the hotspots, could we design a poster possibly where it says you're being watched? I don't know if that would help. Another poster, and I'm quite willing to for you to deliver me or send me some through the post, some leaflets to put around the ward to help and go to local businesses also. The other one was you mentioned you'd support private landowners where they've had it tipped. I don't know how that report's going to get to you, James, because I've had a couple recently. They said, oh, we rang the council and they said, oh, it's not us, that's Forestry Commission or whoever. So I don't know if there's a point where we as members could help to get that information to you, or it's not getting diverted by the call centre before it gets to you. If you're willing to investigate to help to identify fly tippers on private land. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple.
James wants to come back. Go ahead, James.
Apologies, I'd like to answer where I can. We are looking at more enhanced, punchy posters. The recent ones were very much aimed to get the bottom line across. It felt, certainly, I think that my portfolio holder will recall, I was not initially in support of the more punchy ones to start with, because there had been such a long period of time where there had been no engagement with the public, that to almost take the mick and point the finger and sort of tongue in cheek was perhaps a little bit unprofessional on our side. And it was important to perhaps get the bottom line out there first to make sure they know what is what. But going forward, the expectation is that we can now demonstrate slightly more impactful signage. I'm hoping to spend some of our accrued funds to get more posters, more advertisement, more appropriate signage where possible. With regards to the call centres, it has been a difficult process. The handover to Serco staff with the call centres has taken its toll a little bit with that. It's a work in progress. We have seen improvements. I'm in a position where normally if there's evidence and the call taker will be aware that there's evidence, they will send it straight to me. unfortunately, when there's no evidence, there's not much I can really do at this stage. But there's work in progress, and it is starting to get better, if that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple of points, if I may. Firstly, I think the slide that showed the number of prosecutions over the last few years is probably the most sort of pertinent for me. I mean, Brecon accounted for more than half of all prosecutions in Norfolk in the last year, and I think that's really encouraging. And I hope other districts start to follow suit as well. I remember at full council highlighting the lack of prosecutions, and I'm really pleased that Gordon and the Cabinet decided to act on this, and we're actually starting to see the benefit from it, because I think James is absolutely right. There is an awareness now that, certainly in my ward, that it is not acceptable to fly tip. And I think that's really encouraging. That's got to be the absolute foundation of everything we do. You can educate as much as you like, but you've got to be clear on the acceptability or not acceptable to fly tip. In terms of moving forward, there's a couple of points which are really key for me. The first is around the better publicity of the prosecutions, because the wider benefit is that more people become aware that it is possible to be prosecuted. If it's limited to the one person receiving the fine, it's very limited in its impact. The greater the number of people that are aware of them is what's really what we're aiming to achieve. I don't know what the EDP readership is in my ward, but I'd imagine it's very small. And in terms of the local freebie newspaper, about a third of Thetford receives that. So if we're relying on press releases, that's a very small number of people that will be aware of it. And there's not everybody, of course, is involved in social media, or you might not happen to like the Brecon Council Facebook page, and therefore it doesn't appear on your feed at all. So I would urge us to be as creative as possible to get the message out there. And I'm teaching how to suck eggs, James, because we've had these conversations, but I do want to focalise them here as well. I also think we need to be better at communicating legitimate means of disposal. It is a complete mystery to me, as a Brecon councillor and as a Norfolk County councillor, what you can and can't take to the household waste recycling centres and what the costs are. And every time I sit in a residents' meeting with my iPad, people ask me, and I have to spend at least 5-10 minutes looking on the website. Oh yes, you can take a mattress to the tip, and I didn't know that. Oh, there you go. And that happens regularly, and that shouldn't be the case. It should be very clear what you can. Green waste, for example, I regularly see fly tipped. They're very happy to take green waste, and I don't think there's even a charge for it at the tips. So there's, ruling out any unnecessary fly tips is key, and that's through publicity. I would also like us as a council to explore other means of legitimate disposal. I don't even know if we still provide a bulky waste collection service. And if we do, I don't think it's terribly well promoted. I think we do, but again, we don't promote it terribly well. I'm glad we do, but again, I see very little mention of that. One thing I'm also keen to see is prompt removal. We've spoken in the past about when circa operatives are out and they spot a fly tip. It's really important that if they spot it, they report it themselves so it can be removed promptly, so that it becomes unacceptable to sort of see stuff dumped around. I think that happens a bit, but it's something that we can improve upon, no doubt. I see stuff sitting around for a long while, thinking it's been reported, and actually it hasn't. The last thing I'd like to mention is I think our press releases have limited impact when the go-to for a Brecon quote, and no disrespect for Gordon, the go-to for a Brecon quote is the Cabinet member. I would argue that there are very few people in Thetford who would know who the Cabinet member, least of all really mind too much who the Cabinet member is. It would have much greater impact if it was coming from the chair of the local residents group, the farmer who's been impacted by the fly tipped on their material, the chairman of the local parish council if it's in a village, somebody of local standing who stands up and says, this is not acceptable in our community. As much as I respect the Cabinet member's role, actually it's about the sort of hearts and minds of some of this, and there's greater impact to be had by actually local members, dare I say, being quoted in their ward when there's prosecutions, or relevant local people, not necessarily. And I have made this point to the communications team. But actually, if we want to get through to people that it's not acceptable, it needs to be relatable to them. And those people I've suggested, I would suggest carry more weight than perhaps the relevant Cabinet member. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Linda.
Thank you, Chairman. Of course, what we're talking about is a behaviour change, a culture change, and you can't do that overnight. But picking up a lot of what other members have said from all parties, it's about keeping it simple. So in Watton, where I live, near Tesco's, we had a dreadful fly tipping problems because there were bins there and people were using them, but they were overflowing, and then there was the wrong stuff there. We didn't do posters, we did a simple picture, which although I'm not a member for Watton, I happen to live near there. And every couple of weeks, I made sure that picture was renewed, laminated and stuck up there. It took about 18 months, but we changed that behaviour. That site doesn't need a picture now and people don't fly tip. It's about getting the simple message over, and it doesn't matter what language we speak, it's a picture will say 1,000 words. The other thing I'm rather disappointed in is that nobody's mentioned up till now the use of free cycle sites. So if I have something I want to get rid of, I put it on Freegal or Norfolk Recycle and it goes. Because what I don't want, somebody else does. And that's a huge message out for the recycling, reusing message. And I would urge you all, please, in whatever publication or education you give, the kids at the school know about it. But a lot of the public have no idea. It's a free service, no money changes hands, but my old armchair will serve somebody else. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Linda. Any other members wishing? Tim? And then I'll come to you, Gordon.
Thank you, Chairman. It is very rewarding to hear that we've gone from failing to this very robust response. I'm extremely pleased to hear that. Can I offer just a little bit of feedback or something that perhaps we might be able to just ever so slightly improve on our excellent reporting system? So if you go onto the map to report it by Breckland, you can actually see if what you're looking at a fly tip has already been reported, which is excellent. But it would be really useful if you could also put your pin on there as well and say, also email me once you had a result, so that we've, so that you've got more people being told how successful this is.
Yeah, certainly something we can look into. Jason can pick up with the digital team and liaise with James accordingly. I'm not sure, but we'll try and get that. Seems sensible.
Gordon, any wrap-up comments you'd like to make?
Yes, sorry, I'm making notes of what everyone has said, and this will come up when I next speak to my assistant director on this subject. I ought to put my microphone on, didn't I? Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I was most impressed by nearly the first words that James said, and that when he started, we were lagging behind. And of course, it became evident through the conversation that now we are leading. And I mean, it's telling that I, as a member of Breckland, get telephone calls from members of other councils round us saying, aren't you doing well? What's the secret? Or how can we do it better? And I try and tell them, well, first of all, not to nick James, but apart from that, I think we should be encouraging our fellow councils to do what we're doing. I mean, one council leader put in the paper just last week, which you may well have seen, although I understand hardly anyone now reads the EDP, but that's just what I picked up, said that their council had a policy of not enforcement. And I thought, well, if they come to Breckland, they can see by driving through that enforcement works. Something James said, which I hadn't actually realised, and I should have done, and I ought to have asked this question before, no repeaters. Now, isn't that telling? We've been doing this now for however long, a couple of years, actively going out and trapping people. We've not caught anyone twice. I think that's tremendously important to bear in mind. I do also want to encourage you, to help us to report things, to take notes, to record, to take pictures, all of these things. But as someone said a few minutes ago, please use the report it button. I don't want James spending a day and a half each week answering your telephone calls. So use the report it button, and that then gets through. I think our record for picking up a fly tip from the report it button, somebody told me a few weeks ago, was 20 minutes, because they have this direct contact into the cab, and a bin lorry, I think, must do it on its way round or whatever. But these things are important. Please use the report it button. And I've got lots of things more I can say, but I won't.
One question for you, Gordon. There was a reference to increasing capacity potentially through extra staff. When can we expect that to come online?
Well, it's well in hand. I don't know whether it was one of the positions they interviewed for yesterday, was it? But it is well in hand to get, first of all, one extra member of staff. It was proposed a while ago, but then it was decided later on that the particular position that they were recruiting for wasn't quite right. You can appreciate what James does is a little bit specialised, and therefore we need a little bit specialised person to come in. But it is well in hand. I think Rob nodded his head or told me to shut up. I'm not sure which.
As part of the consequence of the South Holland-Breckland relationship coming to an end, there was a degree of sorting out that needed to be done underneath. One of the pieces of work is under Sarah Shipley, who's the assistant director in this area, and James is part of her team, and they're looking at the environmental area that James works in, an additional resource and a change of resource going into that. So there's well underway. We're looking at different types of posts, as well as sort of the apprenticeship, junior model, trainee model, as such like. So yeah, the message has been received and is being dealt with, and I'll take the opportunity to thank James for giving me the one, so a certain member of this chamber could stop bending my ear about a 0. So thank you very much, James.
Thank you very much. Any final comments from members? Yes, Peter.
Yeah, for James, if he's going into schools as and when he's got help and everything else, we can do it through the Breckling app. I'm the representative for them, and they have done green projects at the moment where they're doing recycle bins and different things. So that we could add to that, with especially your distinct with pictures of fly tipping. And just one resident said there was a box of old brake shoes and discs dumped in one of my wards, villages. I went to investigate before I reported it, and a walker told me gypsy guy traveller just come along and took all the scrap away because it was valuable. So why would somebody dump that in the first place? But that's, you know, just a point.
Thank you, Peter. Mike, then Linda.
The one thing which I'm really impressed with, and that's come forward through this pandemic and what have you, is the number of people who've actually taken upon themselves to go litter picking. It's an absolutely is an unbelievable phenomenon. We have got in my village, we call him the Wheating Womble. Every morning he goes out for a run and he picks up the litter and what have you. This time last year, he had a heart attack whilst he was out running. He was fortunately came upon by 2 people who knew how to do CPR. They worked on him for 40 minutes before the ambulance arrived. The ambulance arrived, and 40 minutes after that, the air ambulance, and it was a further 2 hours before they were able to fly him to Papworth. 2 weeks later, he's out running again. So he's still out there doing it. And I just find it phenomenal that so many people have now come forward and are doing it.
They take the litter.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would support what Mike said. I mean, in our village, we have people out every day, and I know there's 1 or 2 members sitting in this room who every day they go out, they have a carrier bag for their rubbish, so applaud to them. But James, please use your ward members. We are there, we know the hot spots. We are your eyes and ears on that ground. And, you know, you've got, what was it, 49 altogether, something like that. We can be there as your unpaid help, okay?
And Hilary.
Yes, sir. Something that's come to mind over the recent pandemic, and we've been making phone calls to, you know, people in isolation, etc. a lot of had fridges go down, etc., etc. I have been informed, and I have to say that, because obviously I'm not absolutely sure of the cost, that it was going to cost £80 to take a fridge freezer away. Now, that's, whilst I agree it does cost, it did seem to be in a phenomenal amount. And I do wonder if that's why in certain areas you find fridge freezers and washing machines and everything else in gardens. I don't know if that needs to be looked at, or if somebody can confirm what the real costs are.
I think Rob is just doing that right
Oh,
now.
thank you. Thank you, Rob.
I'll try and pretend I didn't just have to quickly look it up to remind myself of the fee we charge. That figure's not correct, councillor Bushell. So the figure is £35 for 1 to 3 items, £5 per additional item after that, up to a maximum of 6. So significantly less than the figure you were quoted.
A veritable bargain. Lose 3, get 3 for a further £10 each. Fabian, then Gordon.
Yeah, just to quickly add on response to Hillary's, if you're actually buying a new electrical item now, they are obliged to take away your old one. So I think people just need to be reminded at that point, because obviously they aren't going to do it if they're not as they're forced to or reminded. So.
Thank you. And Gordon.
Well, I was just going to pick up on what Mike said about the Weeting Womble, and I have heard of the Weeting Womble and indeed other things going on in Weeting and right across the district. Breckland as a council will lend out equipment for people to do litter picks. We as a council will arrange with Serco to pick it up after it's been done. I have to say, I was at a meeting in Thetford, I think on Monday evening for this council, where 2 Thetford persons were given a community award for what they'd done on litter picking. That was not what I was there for. It just happened to be in that meeting 2 people who are doing, I think, 100-day litter pick. This couple are going out every single day for 100 days picking litter. It's something they've arranged and their community saw it. So right across the district, this is, as Mike says, a phenomenon that seems to have come out and increased from the pandemic, when people have been spending more time in their communities and not commuting, as of course most of us do, don't we? We live in one place and work somewhere else. Well, now we live and work at home, a lot of us anyway, and that's certainly gone through. So well done for that. Thank you for reminding me, and thank you for reminding me about the Thetford couple. I think that'll probably be in the Brandon Times at some time, but the Brandon Times is a long way away from me, so I don't know very much about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Terry, one final comment on that.
Yeah, sorry to try this out, Chairman. That particular couple collected their 500th bag of rubbish yesterday, and their 100 days is complete this Sunday. For information. I wanted to ask Gordon, seeing as you mentioned it about the Breckland stock of litter picking equipment. Sadly, that was suspended during COVID because of fear of cross-contamination, different people picking up litter pickers and that sort of thing. I just wondered if you're aware if that's been resumed now that, you know, presumably all of our restrictions have lifted, because that was a very useful resource for residents groups and others to use. Is that now freely available to people?
Well, it is available. I don't know how freely, because I don't know what the queue is like for people who want to do it. But the theory was that we were going to start releasing that again after the 19th, if everything got released on the 19th. And I do know that some groups have booked their equipment. How free, I don't know. If you just put in your inquiry and your proposed date. I know it's booked up with some villages in my area right through till October. So there are a lot of people who are wanting to borrow the equipment.
Thank you very much. I think we're noting with the report. Could I see a proposer, please? Linda, a seconder, Mike. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James, for that. Thank you, Gordon. We'll move on to the next item then, which is the future services, priorities, economy and growth. Who's taking the charge? There we go. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'm just joining the room virtually and in person. I'm conscious that you've had a long session, so I will talk as the technology catches up with us. So he says, failing to talk. Sorry, it was muted on my computer, but yes, there we go. Apologies, we're now up and running. So yes, thank you very much, Chair. So as I said, I know you've had a long session, so I'll keep this to the point. The intention of this short presentation, it sort of follows from a comment Rob made about the previous item, that we're going through a number of consequent changes as a sort of family of officers as a result of our changes with South Holland, and sort of coming into the summer period, needing to plan and prepare and make sure that we are properly set up to be delivering everything we need to in the future. And the intention of this item was just to bring ONS up to speed with some of the thoughts about how priorities should be shaped in the area I'm responsible for, and time permitting, the discussion about how you think we should be framing this and thinking about this. But very conscious, last time in my previous role, I came here talking about business grants, and there was a lot of insight and a lot of positive challenge about the kind of things that you needed from these kind of service areas. So very quick recap and bit of context. So the sort of need to be thinking about this is driven both by opportunity, that the world around us is changing, some national policy environments like what will happen with LEP, the government's levelling up strategy creates need for change and opportunity. The council itself has changed. There are some officers who worked in this space who are no longer here. And the very nature of COVID has seen a lot of change in this space, a lot of people working in different ways, in different roles that they hadn't previously done. And we're at a point where effectively we're able to sort of reimagine the future based on what the council needs it to do, for the sort of, just to anchor this in the language that you might be used to, that the kind of service areas I am talking about are teams that would formally be called in with investment, strategic planning, strategic housing, regeneration, business support, growth delivery. But the way we are trying to approach this is effectively recognizing that there's lots we can learn from what we've done before, but we are able to think about the world in a different way and with a sort of blank piece of paper to an extent, and focus very much on what we need to do and then build the right teams and the right capacity around that. So in terms of what we need to do, there are a few priorities that are sort of emerging, coming to the fore in terms of the focus for this family of services. I'll call them out briefly, but obviously pull out any detail as needed. But, a key element of this, and I know this was a challenge when I was last here, is just about being data-led and understanding as well as we can about what is happening in our area, and having a very live understanding of key performance indicators and what's happening on the patch, and using that to inform those areas where we can make the most difference and be the most beneficial. We can't do everything. We can't apply a sort of shotgun approach to the whole district. We need to be forensic. Another key theme about partnership and enabling. So we are in a multi-tier environment. We work with a complex range of stakeholders, but there's a key role the district can play, and particularly the sort of economic development team can play, in helping corral, bring together and encourage, infuse, or whatever it takes, different partners to help generate new activity, new programs, new projects. And we should play an active leadership role in that. In that context, there's a proposed real focus on placemaking. So thinking about our towns, our villages, our spaces in a holistic way, thinking about the work that through Future Breckland we're going to do in defining what the big game-changing opportunities are and the big ways we could reimagine the future in our spaces. and deliver tangible projects to achieve that. We know, looking at the data, that the East of England as a whole has been less of a beneficiary of national investment for a number of years, and Breckland's within that has not, in my view, necessarily received as much its sort of fair share. So one of our key priorities is to fight for investment, whether that be private or public sector, and sort of create the conditions for the growth that the district needs, whether that's the housing growth, employment growth, or skills growth. Within all of this, a focus on integration. So the work that we do in making sure we have an appropriate local plan should be informed by the work that we're doing with businesses to understand their needs. Business engagement being a key to that. One of the main benefits from the pandemic has been a new kind of relationship with businesses across the district, but we need to build on that and have them inform us about what they need best to succeed and survive. And within all of this, an absolute expectation on us that we need to be creative and innovative with our resourcing. So we've already developed some really successful models where posts are shared with other partners, with other agencies. I'm very aware that the majority of what I am talking about are non-statutory services, so we need to be clever in the way that we resource up our ability to deliver them. I won't talk to this in any great detail because this is definitely in the sort of management speak zone, but this is a management tool I'm using for a similar conversation with colleagues, officers within the service, to effectively say that the way I think it's going to be appropriate for us to work moving forwards is to have much more shared responsibilities. We are too small and have too much to do to worry about things having to be a single person's job. If we're talking about making inward investment inquiries land and bringing businesses into the district, that should appropriately be shared across a number of teams and a number of individuals. It should be a joint responsibility. But within that, there need to be a few areas of key focus, sort of pillars of activity in my head around strategic growth. So the work we do to bring forward sites and opportunities and housing, business development, the work that we do to engage, support and grow business, whether that's Indigenous or from outside of the districts, and placemaking. So the way we deliver tangible, beneficial, strategic activity, particularly in our urban centres, but across the district, and closely aligned on either side of that. The work that we do in strategic planning and the work we do to deliver when we get big funding opportunities in. I appreciate you are likely much more interested in the outcomes rather than the process, and that's sort of our bit to worry about. But just I thought I'd close with a sense of what it is that I think we should aspire to achieve. So in terms of look and feel, and that sort of comes in two forms. One, about the sort of numbers, the things that I think we should hold ourselves accountable to, and should hold ourselves accountable to you in terms of, this is what these family of services will be able to deliver. There's a sort of richer set of KPIs that we're thinking about beneath this, but effectively key things will include investment into the district, whether that's public sector funding or new private sector funding. And it should be in the order of millions that we aspire to lever in. There is opportunity out there and we need to land it. A key element about how much housing and employment opportunities we're unlocking in terms of square footage and in terms of new units, but also in terms of actual quantities of jobs generated and safeguarded. And critically, whilst we are sort of non-statutory, we can play a key role in helping the core business of the council. Business rates income is an important line overall for us, and our job done well should be a real strong, tangible contribution to the budget moving forwards, and that should be something we're sort of tracking and holding ourselves accountable to. In a slightly softer sense, though, the vision is that if we start to align ourselves in this way, that we will all be able to say, these are the bold ambitions we have for our places, whether that's sort of town, village or district level, and we can see the projects, both big and small, that are being brought forward to deliver that. We know where housing is, or we can see housing and growth being unlocked, and not just in a sort of volume sense, but employment and housing opportunities that are going to help meet the needs of Breckland's communities now and in the future. Part of that's going to be about having the right planning and sort of strategy environment. And I guess for you as members, it'll be about knowing that you can walk into your local shop, local business, and them to feel positive about the support and the partnership they have with us as a council, and for us to all be able to tangibly see new business coming into the district and new business growing here. That, as a very brief canter, is the sort of way we are approaching service planning and service visioning. The intention was to have a conversation here with your members as much as time permits, conscious of the time. If it's easier, I'm more than happy to pick up sort of any individual feedback or steers. This is very much an ongoing live conversation we're having, but I'll stop now.
Thank you very much. Paul, do you want to add anything before we? And Andrew, just before I go to members, is there anything specific that you would like members to comment on? Or are you just looking sort of broad feedback?
Thanks, Chair. It is generally just broad feedback. We are in a process of sort of setting out what we think the priority should be. And it's the questions, I guess, to ONS is what should our priorities be and how well aligned does what I've set out feel?
Okay. Anyone who wants to comment on the broad priorities? Limited feedback currently available. Go, Tim.
Well, the feedback really is it's very hard because this is new. We've just had the presentation. You know, I think you're really going to have to come back to us after we've had a chance to actually look at it. Can you send us the slides? We'll have a look at it, and then perhaps we can then properly feedback, giving it some thought.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, could we have the slides sent out to us, please?
Okay, so what I propose to do then is, so thank you for the presentation. We'll take the slides. We're going to do work plan next. We'll then put a section in the next meeting to review what we've had a look at on the slides, and then we can, I mean, if you're here, then great. If you're not here, then we can get, you know, the messages sent through, and hopefully that will provide a useful outcome for you. Okay, well, that was a short and sweet item, which brings us on to, I think it's my favorite item next, if I recall. 1 second, scrolling through the whole thing. Outside body feedback. And Councillor Khyberg isn't here. He normally holds this item up. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to be brief, QEH Hospital obviously cares for a third of the county, the district. They've just issued their annual general report, and in the quality section, they've been rated as good in the medicine, surgery, urgent and non-urgent, emergency care, maternity, diagnostic imaging, and end-of-life care have all been rated as good. And there's strong progress being made improving the digital maternity and rollout of e-prescribing medication. They've had to work differently because of COVID, and one of the things that came out of COVID was a patients engagement committee, which I'm a member of, along with a couple of other governors and members of staff. And we've had one successful meeting, and we've had one face-to-face. Now we're taking that engagement committee on the road. So we're going to go to areas where we can engage directly with the members of the public who will be made aware of the meeting happening and invited in. So I think that's a good thing moving forward, to engage with Breckland residents.
Thank you, Peter. Any other members with any outside body feedback? Seeing none, thank you very much. I'm not aware of any scrutiny call-ins, and I'm not aware of any councillor call for actions, which takes us on to item 16, the work programme. So as mentioned, we'll put the item on those slides on our next agenda. Are there any other comments on the current situation of the work programme? I'll go to Mark, then to David, then to Mike.
Chairman,
ahead,
it looks
Mark.
as though the September meeting, if we add the last slides to that, it's rather overburdened, I would have thought, because section 106 is Serco contract, artificial intelligence, electrical charging points. If we could move one of those into October, if we decide that the last presentation is more urgent, then I would suggest that that would be the best way of proceeding.
I agree. Rob, I fear you're going to make a suggestion and impinge upon members' sovereignty.
If I may.
Of course.
Feel slightly guilty now. I just wondered whether the possibility was if Andrew shared his presentation slides from the presentation he's done, and feedback can be done offline with Andrew making himself available to members of the Scrutiny Commission to discuss on an individual basis or collectively outside of this meeting, rather than requiring it to come back to a formal meeting, if that would help.
Certainly possible. I fear that might reduce the level of feedback Andrew gets, but if members are content that they will provide the feedback and I don't need to put it on an agenda to make sure it happens, then I'm happy to run with that approach. Are you happy? I don't mind. Yeah. Okay, fine.
Can I just make a comment, Chairman? I mean, the concept, it's a concept at the moment, and there is no enough detail behind that concept for us to make a valued judgment on whether we're in the right direction or not. In my humble opinion, I would like some more flesh put on the bones of what was presented to us today before I made a comment.
I'm going to go to Mike, then I'm just going to briefly circle back to Andrew and possibly Rob.
May I suggest, in actual fact, because of it will need fleshing out, I agree with that we actually put it onto the October agenda.
Okay, Andrew, what are your feelings first?
So I can work to whatever works best for the committee. There is a degree more detail that I could. How about as a sort of compromise of all trying to ride all horses here? There's I can circulate a presentation with a layer more detail. I didn't want to sort of overwhelm at the moment. If members feel or able and it sort of works to feedback and this doesn't congest your next agenda, then I guess this will be an ongoing process, and I'm sure you will have me back to talk about this irrespective. But that might discharge this for now. If, however, actually it feels that it's not sufficiently developed and you need a conversation, then perhaps we can schedule that for later down the line.
That sounds like an excellent multi-horse riding proposal. So we'll get the report with a bit more detail. We'll then attempt to feedback by the September meeting remotely. In the event that members don't feel that they've done it justice by that medium, we'll then put it on the September meeting for October, and then we can have the item on the October agenda if necessary. And that gives us every single contingency covered. So good, that's excellent. David, and then Linda, and I don't think anyone else has indicated yet, so go ahead, David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the most, as far as I can see, one of the most important things on the September agenda is probably the Serco contract. I'm not sure what information is going to be supplied on that occasion, but I think it's important to note that we, as generally speaking, the members, excuse me, I'm so sorry, most of the members here have no concept or idea of exactly what is in the contract in terms of the liabilities and responsibilities of Serco. So I hope that that presentation will educate us so that we can actually ask specific questions, because otherwise we're all a bit in the dark.
Conveniently, Rob is here and it is his report. So Rob.
Oh, sorry.
What we've done previously, which I think the Commission felt worked well, is that prior to the official meeting of the Commission, the council officers have given a presentation to that fact of this is council responsibility, this is contractor responsibility, to enable you to direct the questions appropriately to the contractor. if you think that approach is useful, I'm more than willing that we make arrangements to do that. And just to confirm, the person attending from Serco is the managing director of their local government arm, so they're senior representative in this field. So no doubt he will come with local management representatives to deal with more parochial issues, but you'll get a full representation from Serco. But that's my suggested approach, if you're agreeable, Chair.
So how would you see that happening?
The way we've done it previously is we meet for an hour prior to the commission meeting, and usually it's a combination of Rihanna, myself and a couple of others go through and say, this is our statutory obligations, this is how we discharge it in our internal team, this is what's required of the contractor, take your questions about who does what, who's responsible for what, and then you don't find yourselves in the position you're asking Serco a question and Serco go, well, that's not in the contract, that's on the council. So it tends to work quite well.
Okay, that's great. Does that cover you, David?
Yes, I think that's very, very helpful, Chair, because otherwise, as I say, I think we'd all be in the dark. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just looking ahead to October, the Inspiring Communities programme. Will that include the effect of the whole pandemic situation on our communities? How priorities have changed? For instance, you know, the incidence of domestic abuse, the higher, etc. Because I think it's important at some point we review what we've all learnt and our communities have learnt from the pandemic. So if that's the appropriate place to do it, fine. If not, please can we do it somewhere?
Yes, I think the presentation, it was interesting timing on our Inspiring Communities, because we launched it and then a month later we go into a global pandemic. It's as though we saw it coming. I think when Steve, James and Sam Armitage come along to present it with the portfolio holder, they will talk to you about the natural change that's occurred because of the pandemic. A lot of what we set up to do around domestic violence, social isolation, mental health are still the same themes, but the approach has been tailored as a consequence of a huge amount of learning through our collective pandemic response. So I think you'll find that it's naturally covered.
Any other points on work programme? No? Excellent. Right, thank you. Oh. I'm going to get myself a paper copy next time. This next meeting. Okay, so the next meeting is as advertised on the 9th, subject to us. So are you envisaging we do it 9, do our hour on Serco, and then, okay, so we'll probably be here an hour early, do our Serco debrief, and then we'll go into the meeting proper. And I don't have anything else, so unless anyone else has anything else, I'll close the meeting. All right, thank you very much.